The banking system that still has your money in 1769? A coin dealer worked out of a small money exchange shop on Jew Street in Frankfurt. In 1815, his 5 sons were in charge of all of England's, France's, Austria's, Naples's, and Prussia's financial systems. In 1850, this one family had more money than all the royal families in Europe combined. What is their last name? Rothschild. When the gold standard fell apart, none of it went away. The banking empire they built. The central banking system they came up with, or the ways they learned to pay for wars. But it changed, grew, and now, in 2025, it's running your life. The Rothschild plan is behind everything. The monthly mortgage payment, the huge national debt that your tax dollars pay off, the interest rates that determine how much your money can buy, and the central banks that print your money. The plan is to keep wealth across generations using trusts. Give central banks total monopolies on creating money, fund both sides of wars to guarantee profits, and keep a web of intermarried banking families coordinating policy across borders while staying completely hidden from the public. The Rothschilds didn't just build a banking empire. They also built the whole system that modern finance works on. The Federal Reserve uses their plan as a guide. Their structure is similar to that of the European Central Bank. The IMF and World Bank use the same methods to lend money, and there's no way out because the system is unbased on banks owned by the Rothschild family anymore. The system is the way it works: central banking, government debt, currency that charges interest, and funding wars. For the last 250 years, every central bank, every government bond market, and every international financial organization has copied this method. Let me show you step by step how the Rothschilds built this system, how they used wars to become the richest family in history, how central banking made them untouchable, and why, 250 years after Meyer Amschel Rothschild opened a coin shop in Frankfurt, you are still paying interest into a system his family built. It's not just academic knowledge to understand system. It's about staying alive. This system was built to take money from countries through government debt and send it to banking families through interest that keeps growing. Once you understand how it works, you'll see it everywhere around you. On February 23, 1744, in the Frankfurt ghetto, Meyer Amschel Rothschild was born. Frankfurt's Jews were crammed into one street, Judengasse, which means Jew Street in German. Jews weren't allowed to buy land. They couldn't work in most jobs, but they could handle money. Meyer's dad worked as a money changer and sold rare coins. Meyer took over the business when he was only 13 years old, after his father died. This was the beginning, nothing fancy, just trading coins. But Meyer understood something that would make his family the richest in all of history. The person or group that controls how money is made and given out controls everything else. Owning land, having military forces, and having governments are all less important than the raw power that comes with controlling the creation of money. Meyer got a job as court agent to Prince William of Hanau in 1769. He was one of the richest royals in Europe. William made his money by renting out Hessian soldiers to other kingdoms, which were basically armies for hire. Meyer handled William's payments from these deals, taking a cut from each one. But Meyer's sons were his most revolutionary idea. He had 5 sons, Amschel, Salomon, Nathan, Karl, and James. Meyer sent each of his sons to one of Europe's 5 main financial centers on purpose in the early 1800s. Amschel stayed in Frankfurt. Salomon moved to Vienna. Nathan went to London. Karl made Naples his home. James started working in Paris, one family tree, 5 big cities, and one network that works perfectly together. This was the start of the Rothschild Empire. It had power spread out over many places, but was all controlled from one central vision. In each city, each son acted as an independent banker, which made him look like a trustworthy banker to the elite in each country. But because they worked behind closed doors, all 5 brothers were always sharing information, coordinating their plans, and moving money between countries faster than any government could keep track of. They created the first international banking network in the world and used it as a weapon to do something that had never been done before: fund wars on both sides at the same time. The Napoleonic Wars, which lasted from 1803 to 1815, were a big turning point for the Rothschild family. Every government needed money badly to pay for their armies. France needed money. Britain needed money. Everyone needed money. Austria, Prussia, Russia, and so on. The Rothschilds gave it to everyone who was involved. Nathan Rothschild, who lived in London, paid for the British war machine. James Rothschild in Paris gave money to Napoleon's troops. Salomon in Vienna paid for Austria's army. The family didn't care at all who would win. Their only goal was to be the creditor when the war was over. Wars come to an end, but debt stays forever. This is the plan that made them unbeatable players. When Britain needed to pay soldiers who were fighting in Europe, it was impossible to move gold across enemy lines. Nathan Rothschild came up with the answer. He would lend money to Britain in London. His brothers, who were stationed all over Europe, would then pay British troops directly from Rothschild banks in those areas using the local currency. The gold in question never really went anywhere. The Rothschilds just moved money around between their family branches to keep their books in order. This new idea made them completely necessary. Governments couldn't even fight wars without using Rothschild credit networks, and the Rothschilds made money on every transaction that went through their system. But the Rothschild family's real wealth came to them all at once. June 18, 1815, the Battle of Waterloo. Napoleon and Wellington are fighting. The outcome of the battle would change the course of all of Europe. If Napoleon won, French bonds would go up a lot, but British bonds would lose all their value. If Wellington won, British bonds would go up a lot and French bonds would go down a lot. The winner would decide the fate of whole fortunes. Nathan Rothschild, who ran a business in London, had built a private intelligence network that was faster than any government had. He used carrier pigeons and fast ships to get information before anyone else could. Nathan found out the results of the battle before the British government did. Wellington had won. But this is what made Nathan a legend. Instead of buying British bonds right away, he started selling them off in front of everyone. Other traders saw Nathan Rothschild selling British bonds and went into a full-blown panic. They figured out that he knew something that made him think Britain had lost. They also started to panic and sell. The prices of British bonds fell quickly. Nathan then bought everything back after prices dropped to their lowest point. Huge amounts at prices that are too low to be true. The official news finally made it to London hours later. Wellington had won. British bonds shot up in value. Nathan Rothschild had just made the most money ever in a trade, getting 20 times his money back in just one day. This one trade made the Rothschilds the richest family in Europe. But more importantly, it showed the world how powerful they really were. They had better information than governments. With just one trade order, they could change the whole market. They had gone beyond being just bankers. They had become kingmakers who decided who would live and who would die. After Waterloo, the Rothschilds became the main lenders to almost all European governments. They owed money to France. They owed Austria money. They owed Prussia money. They owed Britain money. Lenders have total control over borrowers when they are in debt. You can't be challenged by governments that owe you money. You have to refinance their current debt. You are in charge of structuring new loans for them. The Rothschilds didn't take over Europe by invading it with troops. They took it over by using bonds and debts. And they did this so quietly that most people didn't even know it was happening. But the Rothschilds knew something much deeper than just lending money to governments. They knew that real power didn't come from giving out money that was already there. The real power came from being able to control the creation of money itself. And to do that, they had to control the central banks. The Bank of England, the first modern central bank in the world, was set up in England in 1694. It was a private bank owned by shareholders, but it had a government charter that gave it the power to print British money. The model was both very simple and very new at the same time. The central bank lends money to the government. The central bank makes that money out of thin air and then charges interest on it. The government pays back the loan with money it gets from taxes on citizens. However, since the bank charges interest, the government will never be able to pay off the entire debt. The debt keeps getting bigger and the central bank keeps making money. The Rothschilds didn't start the Bank of England, but Nathan Rothschild became one of its biggest shareholders in the early 1800s, and as soon as they fully understood this model, they used it in all of their businesses. James Rothschild became a major shareholder in the Banque de France while he was in France. Salomon Rothschild built strong ties with the Austrian National Bank while he was in Austria. Karl Rothschild helped pay for the building of banks in Naples. Everywhere the pattern was the same. Take control of or start the organization that makes a country's money. Not the government itself, the bank, because governments take out loans. They make it out of thin air. This is why this is important to your life right now in 2025. The Federal Reserve, which was set up in 1930, works in the same way. It works like a private bank with a government charter. The Fed makes dollars out of thin air and lends them to the U.S. government at interest. It is owned by member banks, which include descendants and successors of Rothschild banking networks. The Federal Reserve has a complete monopoly on making dollars, so the U.S. government can't print its own money without paying interest. The government borrows money from the Fed, pays interest on it, and that interest goes to the Fed's shareholders as profit. This is how the Rothschild system works now. A central bank that is privately owned and has a government-granted monopoly on making money, giving money to the government and charging interest, making debt that, in theory, can never be fully paid off. This model has been used in all developed countries around the world. The European Central Bank, the Japanese Bank, the Bank of England, all private or semi-private organizations that have a monopoly on making money, all lending to governments and charging interest on it. All of this is based on the Rothschild model, which was perfected in 1815. Now, let me tell you how to keep your family's wealth for many generations. This is where the Rothschilds became truly impossible to kill. Most family fortunes fall apart within 3 generations at most. The founder makes money by working hard. The kids are able to keep it up, the grandkids throw it all away. But the Rothschilds set up a system where wealth grows over generations and never stops. The tools they used were easy to use. Cousins marrying each other, family trusts, and rules for inheriting property that favor the oldest child. The Rothschild sons wed their cousins from the Rothschild family. Salomon's daughters married Nathan's sons. The daughters of Karl wed the sons of James. For more than 100 years in a row, Rothschilds mostly married other Rothschilds in the family. This plan kept wealth in the family bloodline. No one from outside is allowed in. No loss of family wealth. Second, they set up trusts that moved money from one generation to the next without having to pay taxes on it. When Meyer Amschel died in 1812, his will said that only male descendants could run the family bank, that all family money would be kept in trusts run by the family as a whole, and that no one outside the family would ever be able to see how much money the family had. This meant that governments couldn't tax wealth they couldn't see or count. Heirs couldn't waste money they didn't own. The family also ran as a single financial entity across several countries, which made it impossible for the government to keep an eye on them. Third, they strategically spread out their investments. The Rothschilds did more than just banking. They paid for building railroads, mining, and factories. They paid for the building of the Suez Canal. They bought vineyards all over France. They ran mining operations all over South America and Africa. By the end of the 1800s, Rothschild banks were paying for more than half of all railroad construction projects around the world. They owned a lot of shares in De Beers Diamonds, Rio Tinto Mining, and many other businesses around the world. This wasn't spreading out to protect against risk. This was vertical integration of whole industries. They ran the banks that lent money to the businesses that made money, which then went straight back into their banks. Let me show you exactly how this system takes money from you today. When your government doesn't have enough money in its budget, it sells bonds to make up the difference. The central bank makes new money to buy those bonds. The bond principal amount and interest charges are now owed to the central bank by your government. Where does the government get the money to pay that interest? From the taxes you pay. You work hard, make money, pay taxes, and some of that money goes to pay interest on money that a central bank made out of thin air using the Rothschild model. You don't have to pay for government services. You're paying interest to bondholders. And some of those bondholders are the descendants of banking families like the Rothschilds, who have held sovereign debt for 250 years in a row. The U.S. national debt is $39 trillion in 2025. Interest payments every year have reached $1.2 trillion and are still going up. That's more money than the whole defense budget. That $1.2 trillion doesn't build schools or roads. It only pays bondholders interest. Who are these people who hold bonds? Central banks, foreign governments, institutional investors, and private banking families that have been involved in sovereign debt since the Napoleonic Wars. This is how the system works right now. Governments are always borrowing money. Interest builds up over time, you pay forever. But this is where the Rothschild model really shines: hiddenness and secrecy. The Rothschilds were mostly out of the public eye after the 1800s. They stopped putting out estimates of how much money families had. They stopped putting their family name on everything. The Morgans and the Rockefellers were other banking families that became the public faces of finance. But the Rothschilds were still very much a part of the system's foundation. They became owners instead of CEOs, partners instead of presidents. On paper, advisors are better than public owners. It is almost impossible to figure out how much money the Rothschilds have today. Depending on how you figure it out, public estimates range from $400 billion to more than $2 trillion. This includes family trusts, charitable foundations, and other holdings that are spread out. But the real number is impossible to know because the family made their money in a way that makes it impossible to know. Family banks are not open to the public. Tax havens are where trusts are registered. Holdings are spread out over hundreds of different companies. This isn't avoiding taxes. This is how it was meant to be. Wealth that is easy to see draws attention from regulators and taxes. Invisible wealth grows quietly and without interruption. The banks of the Rothschild family are still around today. Rothschild & Co., which is based in Paris, is one of the biggest independent financial advisory firms in the world. They help governments with privatization plans, mergers of companies, and talks about restructuring debt. They don't make the news. They don't try to get attention or publicity. But they are deeply rooted in the system at the very top levels. Decisions made by the European Central Bank about policy, IMF programs to help countries that are having trouble, countries talking about sovereign debt. The Rothschilds are at all of these events, but they are not the main leaders. They are important advisors, not visible to the public, but absolutely necessary, and this is what most people don't get. The Rothschild family doesn't need to be in charge of the system anymore. The system can now support itself completely. There are central banks in every country in the world. Every government's finances are based on sovereign debt. Everywhere you go, there is currency that pays interest. The Rothschilds built the first buildings. But now architecture runs itself on its own. The Federal Reserve can work just like the Rothschilds planned it to in 1815, even if members of the Rothschild family aren't in charge of it. The system is what lives on, not the family bloodline. Let me show you what it's like to work today. BlackRock and Vanguard together manage more than $20 trillion in assets. They own big chunks of every major bank, corporation, and industry sector. They are like the Rothschilds of today, not by bloodline, but by copying the method. Power was spread out across different places. Centralized control is at the heart of it. Ownership structures that can't be seen. Ways to keep wealth in the family for many generations. So deeply embedded in the system that it is impossible to regulate. Larry Fink at BlackRock runs things in the same way that Nathan Rothschild did in London. He doesn't have to own everything. He just needs to be the advisor, the lender, and the person who makes sure everything goes smoothly in every deal. The Rothschilds showed the world how to run a business this way. BlackRock made it better for today. Now, let's talk about the big thing that everyone is talking about, conspiracy theories. There are more conspiracy theories about the Rothschilds than about any other family in history. People say they can control the weather. They are said to have started every war. People say they are in charge of the Illuminati. They pray to Satan. This is total nonsense, and it's dangerous nonsense because it hides the real system behind a wall of fantasy. The Rothschilds didn't need secret groups or rituals that were based on magic. They had credit systems and networks for banks. They didn't have to worship Satan. They believed in compound interest and making plans carefully. People who believe in conspiracy theories think they are supernatural and magical, but the truth is much simpler and much scarier. They just knew more about money than anyone else who was alive. The Rothschilds really had power because they had access to information, credit, and time. They had better ways of getting information than governments did. They could get credit when no one else could. And they played the long game over generations while others chased short-term profits. That isn't magic or a power from another world. That's a method, and that method is now permanently built into every financial system on the planet. The Rothschilds knew something that most people still don't believe. War is the most profitable business in human history. Weapon sales are a big part of that, but the real reason is that war creates huge amounts of sovereign debt. To pay for their armies, governments borrow a lot of money. They say they will pay back after winning, but wars cost a lot of money. In reality, the debt is never fully paid off. It gets refinanced over and over again, and the lenders get interest payments forever. The war caused $200 billion in sovereign debt. The Second World War made $2 trillion. The Cold War cost $10 trillion. The war on terror has put the U.S. in debt by more than $8 trillion. Every war raises the amount of debt in the world. Every rise helps bondholders directly. The Rothschilds paid for the Napoleonic Wars, the Crimean War, and the Franco-Prussian War. They made a lot of money from all of them, not because they wanted war, but because they knew that governments at war need credit badly and will pay any interest rate to get it. The U.S. spends $1.2 trillion a year just on interest payments. By 2030, that number will reach $2 trillion as old debt is refinanced at higher interest rates. That's $2 trillion a year going straight from taxpayers to bondholders. Who are these people who own bonds? Central banks, sovereign wealth funds, and institutional investors all use the same playbook for sovereign debt that the Rothschilds wrote 200 years ago. But this is the most profound comprehension of this system, and it is what makes it utterly unavoidable. The central bank model is set up so that it is mathematically impossible. The government owes $105 when the central bank makes $100 and lends it to the government at 5% interest. However, there is only $100 in the whole system. The government needs to borrow $105 to pay back the original $105. But now it owes $110.25 with interest. The extra $5 can only come from borrowing more money. The debt keeps getting bigger and bigger. It is impossible to fully pay back. This is not a bug in the system. It's how it was meant to work. Permanent debt means that taxpayers will always have to pay interest, which means that wealth will always be moving from taxpayers to creditors. The Rothschilds didn't come up with this system. The Bank of England made it in 1694, but the Rothschilds made it better and spread it to every continent. They knew that creditors are in danger when a government controls its own money supply. But a government that has to borrow money from a private central bank is always in debt, and debtors can be easily controlled. In 1815, Nathan Rothschild famously said, "I don't care who is put on the throne of England to rule the empire where the sun never sets. I control the British money supply, and the man who controls the British money supply controls the British Empire." He wasn't bragging, he was stating a fact. And that fact is still true today, in 2025. Controlling money creation means controlling everything else, including elections, politicians, and policies. The Federal Reserve is in charge of the money supply in the United States. The euro is controlled by the ECB. The yen is controlled by the Bank of Japan. These are not government agencies that the public can control. They are private or semi-private organizations that follow the Rothschild model from 1815. And the Rothschild family's wealth is still built into these systems through their shareholdings, advisory roles, and relationships that go back hundreds of years. So what are your options? What should you do when you can't get out of a system? You have three choices. Option 1, just go with it. Know that central banking and sovereign debt are important parts of modern finance, not problems or bugs. The system makes the economy grow by giving people stability, liquidity, and access to credit. Yes, it takes money through interest charges, but it also stops the crazy boom-bust cycles of the 1800s. Take advantage of the system's tools, like mortgage, credit, and investments. Option 2, fight it actively. Back politicians who want to get rid of or audit the Federal Reserve. Instead of using central bank currencies, buy gold and Bitcoin. Cut down on the amount of debt you have. Vote for fiscal responsibility. Make it clear how the system takes money from people and fight it in a democratic way. Option 3, fully comprehend it and adjust your position accordingly. If you can't get out of the system, use it to your advantage. Own the things that the system structurally favors. Government bonds, bank stocks, and businesses that do well when credit is cheap. If the system moves money from people who owe money to people who lend money, you should be a lender, not a borrower. This doesn't mean that the system is right. This is recognizing patterns and putting yourself in the right place. For 250 years, the Rothschild system has used sovereign debt and central banking to concentrate wealth. It will keep going because it's part of every government's budget and every central bank's founding document. The Rothschild family is still around today. They are still very powerful and very rich, but they are no longer the public face of finance. They don't have to be anymore. They made a system that works perfectly without them. In this system, governments borrow money all the time, central banks make money all the time, and interest grows forever. A system where war makes people go into debt, debt makes people dependent, and dependency gives people power. Meyer Amschel Rothschild passed away in 1812. Yet his 5 sons established an empire that significantly influenced the contemporary world we inhabit. Nathan passed away in 1836. In 1868, James died. But their banking networks changed and grew into the central banks, investment firms, and sovereign debt markets that control trillions of dollars today. The family name slowly disappeared from the news, but the system they built became the bedrock of the world's economy. The Rothschilds showed beyond a shadow of a doubt that having land or leading armies isn't the most powerful thing. The most powerful thing is to be in charge of making money and paying off debts. Governments come and go, armies rise and fall, but debt is always there. The person who has the debt has the real power. You can't get away from the Rothschild system. A central bank made every dollar you earn out of thin air. Every tax you pay goes toward paying off the debt that system made. The Rothschilds helped design the financial system that your interest payments go into 250 years ago. You live in the buildings they made, but you can't see them until you finally do. If this video showed you a system you had never seen before, and now you know that a family built the financial structures that control your life 250 years ago, please subscribe to this channel. The first step to protecting yourself is to understand how the system works. You can't get away from the Rothschild banking system, but you can see it in action, and that changes everything about how you think about money. The Rothschilds came up with the idea of central banking, the sovereign debt system, the war finance mechanism, and trusts and strategic intermarriage as ways to keep wealth in families for generations. You live in that system every day, and it is modern finance. Welcome to the Rothschild way of doing things.